Water is a fundamental element of all life. Without it, a society cannot survive. Without enough of it, a city can't assure a decent quality of life for its children. What you are about to see is Albuquerque's solution to achieving a sustainable water supply for our future and that of our children.
They say you can see 4 states up here, and every one of them has water problems. Some of them are dealing with it better than others. You're looking at nearly 750,000 people down there. A 100 years ago, maybe 20,000 or so, when I came to this valley, maybe 1/10 of what we have right now. What's made all of that possible is the availability of water.
We've seen this astounding growth since the 70s. We've also had some of the wettest years on record since the 70s. So it kind of makes you wonder how long we can keep growing at the pace we have and the way we have, because we are an arid state. We are a desert state. Yeah, we have high mountains and watersheds, but at the same time, how long can you continue to grow in an arid state without really addressing the water problems?
When I started working in the water business, maybe 15 years ago, I was taught that we were sitting on top of Lake Superior. And somewhere in there, the city hired a geohydrologist, and he taught me that Lake Superior had been silted in.
We were very comfortable living with the misunderstanding that we had an endless supply of water in the aquifer below us, which we don't.
Until the late 1980s, the popular perception was that Albuquerque's aquifer was a boundless subterranean reservoir of pure, clean water, thousands of feet deep and stretching from the Sandia foothills to the Rio Puerco, a kind of underground Lake Superior. In 1988, as the city grew, a program of deep well drilling radically altered that perception. The studies found that although the aquifer is large, it has neither the quantity nor quality of water we had assumed. And if we continue pumping at present rates, it will be more and more difficult to reach.
We know that if Albuquerque continues to grow the way it has for the last 30 years, that our quality of life and our natural resources will reach their limits.
We've known for many years that we have a water problem in the city and in the state. But you know, the fact is we are doing something about this problem.
Albuquerque is far ahead of many cities like Las Vegas, other cities that are struggling to find new water supplies. We have our water supply. We contracted for it and started buying it in the 70s. We've got it, and now it's a matter of figuring out the best way to get it to our citizens and using it in a conservative manner.
Back in the 60s, the late 60s, Albuquerque contributed to the construction of the San Juan Chama diversion facility.
The San Juan Chama project carries water from the southern Colorado Mountain watershed into New Mexico, and through a series of tunnels moves that water from the west side of the Continental Divide to the east side, delivering it into the Rio Grande Basin by way of the Chama River. The city of Albuquerque owns 48,200 acre-feet of this water. It is a legacy provided by wise planning many years ago.
We used to think that the San Juan Chama water flowed down the Rio Grande and eventually seeped its way into the aquifer. We now know that that's not the case. So we simply must use that San Juan Chama water in more beneficial and different ways than it's been used in the past.
Because the city is now pumping more water from the aquifer than is being replenished, a comprehensive multi-phase water resource strategy has been developed to reduce groundwater pumping to renewable levels. The intent of this strategy is to assure a sustainable supply of water for Albuquerque citizens well into the future.
Albuquerque is attacking its water challenge in 3 ways: with a comprehensive groundwater protection policy and action plan to find and clean up the contaminated water in our area, with a vigorous conservation program geared towards a 30% reduction in per capita water use, and with this water resource strategy, which will help us achieve a sustainable supply for the future.
What became very apparent is we cannot continue business as usual. Sole reliance on the aquifer is not sustainable. So what we've done is developed a series of alternatives, and we're now implementing those alternatives to integrate our surface and our groundwater, to provide drinking water, non-potable water for irrigation, and to be able to take some of that water and replenish the aquifer.
Implementing the strategy at this stage involves getting the permits that we'll need to build the facilities to move to a sustainable supply. We also need to develop conceptual designs of what those facilities will look like.
The Public Works Department is the lead department for implementation of the Water Resource Management Strategy, which was adopted by the City Council and is being funded through rate increases.
We've been relying on groundwater as our sole source of supply since the beginning of the city. And now we're going to change. We're going to integrate both surface and groundwater to be able to provide a long-term sustainable supply.
The first step will be to identify sites where we'll locate the facility. So we'll need to come up with the best site to remove the surface water from the river. We'll need to find a site for a water treatment plant, which might take a land area of around 100 acres. And we'll also need to identify the routes that we'll use for transmission pipelines that'll move the purified water from the water treatment plant out into the city water distribution system. So implementation of the strategy involves 2 elements. One, a drinking water supply project, and the second is a series of recycling or reuse and reclamation projects. The North I-25 recycling project will reclaim and reuse water from Phillips, Sumatoma, and Silmax and provide that water to some industrial users up in that part of the city, and also use that water to irrigate fields at the new Balloon Fiesta Park.
The general process is that our waste stream water, which is fully treated, will be pumped across the street to a holding tank over near Honeywell, who's donated the land. Then it will be conglomerated with other water and sent through a gray water system, and then that water will find its way to the Balloon Fiesta Park.
One of the reasons that we're involved in this project is we are a large water user, and we feel that it's necessary to conserve as much as possible, reuse as much as possible. If we were not of that mind, we would be consuming from the city today 5 times what we actually draw from the water. What makes this unique is that it is a public-private cooperation to the point of investment, and one of the few in the country of that sort.
A second component of this project will collect San Juan Chama water to provide an additional 2 million gallons a day of irrigation water. About half of the water pumped from the aquifer to serve Albuquerque customers is returned to the river after being treated at the Southside Water Reclamation Plant. The city's new water resource strategy calls for using some of this water to irrigate parks and turf areas, and after additional treatment, to supply local irrigation needs.
Recycling of wastewater and industrial water is common practice throughout the United States. And again, there are a series of federal, state, and sometimes local regulations in place that govern the safety and quality of those reclaimed and recycled waters. Now, the drinking water project will involve a 90 million gallon per day water treatment plant that will purify our water once we remove it from the river, and transmission pipelines that will move that water out into the city's water distribution system to provide it to customers. Right now we're looking at several different options or ways to withdraw our water from the river. These might involve collection from infiltration galleries installed along the river, between the river and the riverside drain. We'll also look at using some of the existing facilities that the irrigation district has, the existing canals and drains and diversion dams. There are a number of cities, in fact almost all cities, draw their water from the river. So it's really quite common, and the technology is well established to purify this surface water in order to make it safe enough to provide to customers.
A water purification plant is basically a filtering system which collects and settles out larger undesirable particles in the water. Chemicals are added to filter out the smaller particles and to remove bacteria from the water to further purify it prior to distribution to city water customers.
A small but very important component of our strategy is to be able to take treated drinking water and inject it into the ground and use it later. Our drought reserve, our savings account. This will allow us to draw upon it in times when surface water is not available.
I think it's important that people understand that this new method of taking water that we're going to have, taking surface water that we bought from the San Juan Diversion Project, really is sort of putting water in the bank, and that we're not drawing down on our aquifer as fast as we might have, which is a good savings account for those years that we know will come when there's going to be a drought, when we're not getting much moisture. We know we'll have a water supply. So there's no reason to be using our savings account when we've got a perfectly good checking account out there on the river.
When I was a little boy, you could walk across this river with no problem. It was just dry sand is all you would encounter. It was not wet at all for different seasons. It would just go dry, and then again it would come with a horrible flooding menace the next year. But that's the way this river runs, and it's always going to run that way. It's never going to change that pattern. There'll be many years ahead of us where this river will run dry. It won't run, it'll just sit there and show you the sand.
The total estimated cost of Albuquerque's water resource strategy is $180 million. About $30 million will go towards water reclamation and reuse, and the balance will go toward the diversion, purification, and distribution of the city's San Juan Chama water.
The first stages of this project have been paid for by the rates paid by Albuquerque's water customers. The completion of the project will be funded by periodic rate increases that were adopted by the City Council in April 1997.